My sister-in-law, driven by a bitter sense of jealousy, decided to abduct my precious daughter in a twisted attempt to scare me and teach me some sort of lesson. Her irrational belief was that my newborn would overshadow her so-called miracle baby, stealing all the attention that she felt should be hers alone. Ironically, after all her scheming, she ended up behind bars for the night, which was not something anyone had ever anticipated. I have been happily married to my husband, Lucas, for 5 wonderful years. We first crossed paths thanks to our mutual friends, who arranged a blind date for us. Honestly, I remember how hesitant I felt about stepping into a rendezvous with someone I had never even heard of before. The anxiety of having to start a conversation from scratch with a complete stranger was daunting, yet the instant Lucas and I saw each other, an undeniable spark flickered between us. A casual night out evolved into a conversation that flowed more smoothly than I ever expected. That evening became the starting point of a genuine bond, one that compelled us to keep meeting up. We soon realized we had an effortless way of communicating and a comforting sense of belonging in each other's presence. We shared a growing list of preferences, dreams, and random little quirks that mirrored each other's perspectives. It was almost magical how quickly we became certain that this wasn't just a fleeting connection. It was special, a real once-in-a-lifetime kind of feeling. Before long, our relationship deepened, progressing from light-hearted outings to heartfelt discussions about our goals and what our futures might look like. After months upon months of developing this bond, we made the decision to marry. Surrounded by the people who mattered most, we promised ourselves to one another in a ceremony that felt infused with nothing but love and hope. I can still picture the gleam in Lucas's eyes as I walked down the aisle, the spirited cheers from his brother, Kyle, as he stood by Lucas's side as best man, the chorus of laughter from everyone we loved, and the sheer joy that enveloped the entire day. That day remains etched in my memory as one of the most euphoric moments of my life, when I felt certain that our love was not only acknowledged by everyone around us, but was also wholeheartedly celebrated. From early on in our relationship, both Lucas and I shared one clear aspiration: we longed to become parents. We would chat for hours about the bustling footsteps of children running around the house, the echo of childish giggles filling every corner, and the adventures we would have as we guided our children through life. Yet, our hopeful dream of starting a family was quickly met with a barrage of unexpected challenges that felt like an uphill climb. We put in what seemed like endless energy into conceiving, charting every fertility sign I had, rearranging our daily habits to become as healthy as possible, and making sacrifices like drastically cutting back on alcohol and cigarettes. We worked out religiously and meticulously monitored our diet to optimize our chances. Each month, though, disappointment greeted us instead of the joyful news we were aching for. Eventually, both Lucas and I agreed it was time to seek professional medical help. We braced ourselves for whatever answers we might receive, whether good or bad. But when the doctors told us that we were both perfectly healthy, and there was nothing medically preventing us from conceiving, I remember feeling both relieved and frustrated. Their advice, to simply let time do its work and be patient, felt simultaneously reassuring and maddening. Telling an eager couple to wait and see, when they have spent months, nearly years, trying to conceive is no easy prescription. Still, Lucas and I held on to hope, visualizing the day the test would finally read positive, imagining how we might dance around in excitement once that moment arrived. Fortune finally smiled upon us last year, when I skipped a period and started feeling nauseous in the mornings. At first, I brushed it off. Life was busy, and it was easy to label it as stress, or maybe a mild virus. But my best friend, Vivian, noticed my symptoms and made a beeline to my house with a bunch of pregnancy test kits, so many that she could have opened a small pharmacy. She had a strong intuition that this might be our big moment. The second I saw those kits in her hands, my heart hammered with anticipation. My fingers trembled as I ripped open the first one, my tears already brimming with a dizzy blend of hope and dread. When the 2 clear lines finally revealed themselves, my disbelief melted away into a surge of elation, so strong it felt like my heart might burst. Vivian and I literally jumped around, clutching each other and laughing through tears of absolute joy. All the moments of trying, the cycle of hope and heartache, had finally given way to the news we had prayed for. That evening, I was determined to reveal this life-changing surprise to Lucas in a way that would be forever burned into our memory. With Vivian's help, I adorned our living room with festive balloons and picked up a small cake decorated with little baby footprints. It was a humble but meaningful setup, designed to highlight the significance of the long-awaited milestone. When Lucas walked in from work, looking confused by the celebratory atmosphere, he jokingly wondered if I had spontaneously decided it was his birthday, or something. I couldn't contain my grin as I silently handed him the pregnancy test, waiting for the realization to sink in. In a split second, his puzzled face morphed into shock, then ecstasy. He let out a shout and practically scooped me off my feet, spinning me around as his happiness overflowed. We both felt relieved and thrilled beyond measure because all those worries, all those efforts, were finally validated. We were on our way to becoming a mom and dad. During my pregnancy, I visited my gynecologist regularly. Each time I came home, I'd have the latest ultrasound clutched in my hand, beaming with anticipation. I would proudly display each new image on the fridge, turning it into a collage of our growing little one. Every time I caught a glimpse of those pictures, my heart overflowed with love and gratitude, reminding me of the miracle we were carrying. Meanwhile, Lucas and I threw ourselves into preparing our home for our daughter. We spent countless afternoons painting her nursery in bright, cheerful hues, deliberating over the perfect baby furniture, and choosing decorations we hoped would exude warmth and comfort. We relished every shopping trip for baby items, tiny onuses, cozy blankets, plush toys, each small piece symbolizing how our dream was steadily coming to life. When I reached the 12th week of pregnancy, which felt like a crucial hurdle to clear, Lucas and I finally chose to share our joyous secret with our families. We thought we would break the news at a simple dinner at our home, inviting only our closest relatives, so we could see their reactions up close. Everyone arrived expecting just an ordinary family gathering, unaware that we were about to drop a life-changing bombshell. On the evening of the dinner, the room buzzed with excitement and friendly chatter. But my attention was momentarily stolen when I noticed that Lucas's younger brother, Kyle, had brought his new girlfriend even though we had initially hinted it would be a family-only event. I was a bit thrown off, but knowing Kyle's tendency for impromptu decisions, I brushed off my surprise. His girlfriend, Jasmine, was a divorcee with a child from a prior marriage, and she was noticeably older than Kyle. Apparently, they had started talking after meeting at the gym. Throughout dinner, the couple's behavior was quite intense. They clung to each other, exchanged heated kisses, and audibly flirted as if they were overly enthusiastic teenagers who couldn't keep their hands to themselves. We all felt the discomfort in the air, as none of us were used to seeing such public displays of affection in a family setting. Still, I tried not to let that overshadow the true purpose of the evening. When it was finally time to make our announcement, Lucas and I exchanged a secret smile, and he cleared his throat to grab everyone's attention. Without further ado, I presented our growing collection of ultrasound pictures, and, with a glowing grin, declared that we were expecting a baby. For a second, the entire room fell silent, as though everyone was making sure they'd heard us right. Then, the floodgates opened, and we were engulfed in a whirlwind of hugs, cheers, and congratulations. Both Lucas's parents and mine were teary-eyed, overcome with relief and happiness. They knew exactly how many struggles we had endured to get to this point. My own mother held me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks, asking over and over if I was truly okay. I assured her that I had never felt better in my life. My brother and sister-in-law were equally thrilled, offering to help us prepare for the baby's arrival. It was the kind of warm and supportive environment Lucas and I had always yearned to share such wonderful news in. The celebration was lively and emotional. Everyone was either laughing, crying, or doing both at once, except for Jasmine. She sat motionless at the table, her face twisted in what looked like outright anger. Her reaction was so conspicuously out of place that a prickle of unease settled over me. I quietly took Kyle aside to ask if something was off or if we had inadvertently offended her. Kyle, however, seemed unconcerned, shrugging it off without much explanation. After dinner, we gathered in the living room to indulge in dessert and wine. Since I was pregnant, I obviously skipped the alcohol, and Lucas chose to do the same in solidarity. Conversation naturally flowed toward baby talk. Some of our family members reminisced about when they had their children, and others pitched in with thoughtful suggestions. Jasmine remained uncharacteristically quiet, choosing not to participate or volunteer stories about her own experiences as a mother. Then, out of nowhere, she asked if she could see the nursery we had put together. Although it surprised me, I gave her the go-ahead, assuming maybe she had some experience or ideas to share that might be helpful. When Jasmine and I walked into the nursery, I observed her closely. Instead of her taking an interest in the decorations or remarking positively about the design, she started listing criticisms. She said the room was too bright for a baby's comfort, and she implied we hadn't thought it through. I calmly pointed out that we planned to install blackout curtains, so the lighting could be fully controlled. She hardly listened before she moved on to the color scheme, scoffing at our choice to paint the room yellow, grumbling that it wasn't neutral enough. I explained that color was color, and we simply liked the vibrant ambience it offered, but she didn't seem to care. She proceeded to sneer at the little outfits we had neatly folded in the drawers, questioning their quality, and suggesting we were foolish for purchasing what she labeled as cheap, subpar brands. Hurt and annoyed, I finally lost my composure and blurted out my frustration, demanding to know why she was insulting something so personal and meaningful to me and Lucas. Just when Jasmine appeared poised to give a harsh retort, my mother and mother-in-law stepped into the nursery, eyes lighting up at the cheerful decor. They both praised our efforts, finding the space utterly adorable. For a brief moment, it felt like the tension in the room might be soothed by their enthusiasm. However, I wasn't quite ready to let Jasmine get away with her offensive remarks. While my mother and mother-in-law looked on curiously, I repeated my question more firmly, pressing Jasmine to explain exactly what her deal was. My mother immediately sensed that something was wrong and asked what had happened. Not hesitating, I shared how Jasmine had basically ridiculed our nursery and had gone so far as to label our carefully selected baby clothes as cheap. Both older women were momentarily shocked that anyone would be so rudely judgmental on such a joyous occasion. My mother-in-law raised her eyebrows at Jasmine, asking if that was really what she had done. Jasmine, obviously caught off guard by the sudden attention, tried to soften her stance by saying she had merely been concerned about the fabric being too coarse. My mother and my mother-in-law, unimpressed, patted the clothes and noted that they felt perfectly soft. Jasmine then tried to lecture me that as a mother, I needed to be more receptive to advice, an argument that really didn't land well given the way she had expressed herself. My mother stepped in, calmly but firmly pointing out that both she and my mother-in-law had also been mothers, and they would never criticize a first-time mom this harshly. My mother-in-law agreed, stating that there's a significant difference between giving well-intentioned suggestions and openly belittling someone. Caught in this confrontation, Jasmine grew visibly red with shame, seemingly unable to provide a valid justification for her actions. In a silent fury, she stormed out of the nursery. I followed her at a distance, concerned that the evening might escalate into a bigger drama. When she found Kyle in the living room, she told him she was ready to leave right that moment. Kyle, noticing the tension radiating off her, offered a quick apology to Lucas and me, congratulated us once more, then whisked her away. In the days that followed, Kyle reached out to both of us, apologizing profusely on Jasmine's behalf. He mentioned getting an earful from our mother-in-law about bringing Jasmine into our tight-knit family event with no warning. I knew Kyle was only partly responsible for the awkwardness, so I found it in my heart to forgive him easily enough. He tried to shed some light on Jasmine's odd behavior. She had gone through a very tough teenage pregnancy, had dealt with fertility complications when she was married to her ex-husband, and the disappointment of unsuccessful attempts at conceiving again had clearly left emotional scars. Hearing this, I did feel bad for what Jasmine had endured. I would never wish such trauma on anyone, especially not a fellow woman. However, while I was compassionate about her history, I couldn't just brush aside the insensitivity she had shown during our celebration. So, I decided to keep a safe emotional distance from her, at least for the time being. Over time, Kyle and Jasmine continued to date, and when I finally gave birth to our sweet baby girl, CECE, Kyle asked if Jasmine could come visit at the hospital alongside him. Even though Lucas and I both had reservations, we cautiously said yes, hoping she would behave differently now that the baby was actually here. Our hopes were dashed immediately when Jasmine walked in, and at first glance, made a snide comment about C's lack of hair, predicting that our daughter would likely grow up with thin hair. Her remark was so needless and cutting that I saw Lucas's jaw clench. Kyle, sensing the awkwardness intensify, hurriedly ended the visit. Jasmine's pattern of negative behavior toward us continued, to the point where we could practically anticipate it. As the months rolled on, Kyle announced out of the blue that he and Jasmine were getting married. While our father and mother-in-law tried to act supportive, I knew my mother-in-law was disappointed, because she outright disliked Jasmine, seeing how her personality conflicted with the family's usually caring dynamic. She confided in me that she wished Kyle wouldn't rush into this. Lucas tried to speak reason to his brother, pointing out that the marriage felt impulsive, but we learned that Jasmine was already 4 months pregnant, and Kyle had only learned about the pregnancy 2 months prior. They chose to keep it a secret so they wouldn't have to deal with outside judgment right away, but now that the truth was out, they were rushing to plan a wedding. However, in true Jasmine fashion, she threw a tantrum over fitting into her dream gown, because pregnancy weight made it tough to wear the style she wanted. Kyle reasoned with her to pick out something more comfortable for her growing belly, but she was adamant about wearing a specific type of dress. Eventually, she demanded that the wedding be postponed to a month after the baby's birth, so she would have time to shed some pounds. While the scheduling shift caused a bit of inconvenience for everyone, we all had to concede that it was their day to plan, and they were free to decide on a date that suited them. A month ago, Jasmine gave birth to her baby daughter. Lucas and I actually visited her in the hospital to congratulate both parents, hoping that maybe the miracle of a new baby would soften her perspective on family unity. With the wedding rapidly approaching, Lucas had already been asked to stand beside Kyle as his best man. Given that we had a toddler by then, Lucas and I were uncomfortable about leaving CECE behind for the entire day. We thought we would simply bring her along and pass her back and forth between my mother-in-law and myself whenever we needed to. My original idea was to hire a babysitter in the hotel suite, but I was uneasy about leaving CECE with a stranger, especially considering all the news stories about kidnapping and child endangerment. I reasoned it would be safer for CECE to remain in the care of someone she knew, especially since I planned to avoid alcohol at the reception and retire to the room early anyway. About a week before the wedding, I had a phone call from Jasmine, who abruptly wanted to know if CECE was coming. I affirmed that I was planning to bring her, explaining that my mother-in-law and I had a straightforward plan to ensure CECE wouldn't be any sort of distraction. Jasmine curtly told me that she didn't want CECE at her wedding at all, claiming she only wanted her miracle baby to bask in the spotlight. She argued that CECE would siphon the attention she felt was due solely to her infant daughter. I tried to reassure her that everyone present had already met CECE multiple times, and that a wedding is hardly the place where a toddler would steal the show from the bride, groom, or their newborn. But Jasmine was unconvinced and even more upset. She warned that if I didn't respect her wishes, then I wouldn't be welcome at the wedding. Ultimately, this turned into a bigger dispute, pulling Kyle, Lucas, and my mother-in-law into the fray. Kyle assured me that my presence was still desired and insisted I bring CECE, telling me to ignore Jasmine's irrational outburst. Though I was furious at her nerve, I decided to go for Lucas's sake and keep the peace for the family. The wedding day finally arrived, and as I anticipated, some relatives found CECE adorable, remarking on how cute she looked in her little outfit. I caught Jasmine glaring at me multiple times, irritation dancing across her features. But I avoided confrontation, focusing on being polite and staying low-key, so that this day remained about the newlyweds. After the ceremony concluded, we moved on to the reception. As planned, my mother-in-law, Lucas, and I rotated in checking on CECE, who was resting comfortably in our hotel room. Since my mother-in-law enjoyed a little wine and got somewhat tipsy, Lucas and I stayed sober to make sure everything remained under control. Midway through the reception, my mother-in-law rushed into the ballroom in a distressed state, eyes frantic, as she tried to find me. My heart pounded because her demeanor signaled something horrible. Lucas, who was also alarmed, followed closely behind me. With a shaky voice, my mother-in-law told me that CECE was missing from the hotel room. I felt my stomach drop as though the ground had vanished. Lucas demanded an explanation, reminding her he had just entrusted CECE to her care not long ago. She admitted that Jasmine had come by the room shortly after he left, and they chatted briefly. When my mother-in-law stepped into the bathroom for a moment, Jasmine and CECE were gone by the time she returned. Panicked, Lucas and I immediately sought Kyle, asking if he knew where Jasmine had taken our daughter. Kyle was equally stunned, insisting he didn't know anything about her disappearing with CECE. We involved the hotel staff, who scoured the property. Minutes dragged on into nearly an hour, and there was still no sign of them. Unable to bear the agonizing uncertainty, I dialed the police. Kyle tried to placate me, telling me I was overreacting, that Jasmine would never hurt CECE. But how was I supposed to stay calm, when my toddler was missing with a woman who had repeatedly shown hostility toward our family? When the police arrived, we hurriedly recounted the night's events. The wedding guests also noticed the chaos unfolding, and a wave of anxiety spread through the celebration. Not long after, a staff member alerted us that they had located Jasmine behind the hotel. Lucas and I sprinted to the spot, hearts pounding with dread. The sight that greeted us was almost surreal. Jasmine was lounging on a chair, holding CECE in one arm and a cigarette in the other, her own newborn in a carrier at her side. I rushed over to snatch CECE from her arms, checking my daughter over to ensure she wasn't harmed. Lucas, furious and unable to restrain himself, shouted at Jasmine, demanding to know her reasoning for taking CECE, and wandering off without telling a soul. Jasmine acted as if it was no big deal, claiming she just wanted to lend a helping hand to my mother-in-law, and that it was only natural since she was part of the family now. My mother-in-law, who was now reeling from fright and guilt, hollered back at her that disappearing like that with our child was crossing a line. Jasmine, sporting a smug, defiant smirk, coolly remarked that maybe if I had heeded her warning not to bring CECE to the wedding, none of this would have happened. This was the chilling moment I realized that she had orchestrated this entire fiasco to make me terrified, intending to teach me a harsh lesson and exert power over me. Kyle tried to de-escalate the confrontation, suggesting maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. But I knew better. When the police asked if I wanted to press charges, I stared at Jasmine, waiting for a hint of regret in her eyes, some apology, anything. Instead, she maintained that stubborn look, as though she believed she had every right to do what she did. Infuriated and determined never to let her or anyone else threaten my child's safety, I pressed charges for kidnapping. Jasmine was floored, repeatedly protesting that it wasn't an actual abduction, and that the situation was being blown out of proportion. But the police were in no mood to let it slide. They led her away in handcuffs, with Kyle desperately pleading with me to change my mind. My mother-in-law firmly backed me up, telling Kyle that what his wife had done was beyond forgiveness, putting the entire family through such terror, all for her own ego. Update 1. I barely slept that night, with my phone erupting in notifications. I felt a constant knot in my stomach replaying the incident in my head, picturing my daughter gone from the hotel room, and the suffocating fear that gripped me. Kyle has been calling non-stop, pleading for us to drop the charges. He insists Jasmine never intended true harm. But I can't imagine anything more harmful than disappearing with my baby to God knows where. Update 2. Several weeks have trickled by since I pressed charges. The case is marching forward, and the authorities have gathered solid evidence, including CCTV footage of Jasmine carrying CECE out of the room. My mother-in-law's testimony has also pinned Jasmine as the one who took CECE without permission. Kyle is relentless in his efforts to persuade us to withdraw our complaint, lamenting about how this could ruin Jasmine's life. However, when Lucas confronted him with the question of how he would feel if someone took his baby and simply vanished, Kyle was silent. We have decided to keep our distance from him for now, exhausted by his ongoing refusal to recognize how hazardous Jasmine's behavior truly was. Our other family members have been unwavering in their support, equally appalled by her. Update 3. At the hearing, Jasmine admitted guilt, acknowledging that she had crossed a line in taking our child. Her lawyer portrayed it as a singular episode brought on by the emotional high of her wedding day, asserting that she acted without clear judgment. Considering it was her first offense, the judge ruled that Jasmine should complete community service and undergo obligatory counseling rather than receive a harsher sentence. Not long after, Jasmine sent messages to both Lucas and me, claiming she was sorry. Yet, the damage has been done. I no longer trust her with even the most trivial responsibility, let alone anything to do with my daughter's well-being. Although Kyle continues to try and smooth things over, the tension is insurmountable. My parents-in-law remain furious with both Kyle and Jasmine, and have ceased speaking to them altogether. As for Lucas and me, we can't erase our memories of that terrifying evening. We intend to protect our little girl at all costs and distance ourselves from people who would jeopardize her safety.